What have I done? Oh no!
Hello friends, and welcome back to my home. Today we are going to learn how to make bread the Victorian way, starting with making your very own yeast using hops. So it's another episode of Betty Crocker and Beyond. This will be the first era that I am exploring, the Victorian era, through my cookbook, which is just called the Everyday Cookbook Illustrated. And I thought it would be really interesting to start this series with a basic. The bread recipe caught my eye because it's made with something that I had never heard of before, and that is hops yeast. Some of you may know what this is if you are proficient in baking or if you like to explore historical baking methods, but I learned through looking up what hops yeast was and how to make it that the Victorians preferred this over traditional manufactured yeast, which was available at the time, but they preferred to make their own. So that's what we're going to do today. We are going to start with making the hops yeast, which will take about 48 hours, and then we're going to go through the bread recipe. I have read that hops yeast makes bread taste bitter, but not in an unpleasant way. So I assume it's going to be bread that tastes a little bit more like it was made with beer. I don't know. We're going to find out in this episode. Let's get started in making hops yeast, and hopefully it works out because I couldn't get fresh hops, so we're going to have to use dried hops. But I am told via ye old internet that it should still work just fine.
Before I get started, just a quick reminder that I do have an Amazon storefront where I will be linking all of the ingredients that I have used for this bread, as well as some other kitchen items such as my caraway pots, some big jars that would be useful, and things like that. You can check it out down below, but I will also try to link everything directly in my description, including the manual for army bakers and any copy of the Everyday Cookbook that I can find. As taken from the Manual for the Army Baker from 1910, which I will link down below as it is free to view online, begin by adding 5 quarts of water to a pot. Porcelain or granite ware should be used, as iron or tinware can cause the hop tea to be darker and the bread will not be as white as it can be. Here I'm using my caraway nonstick pot, which should do just fine. Add about 1/2 ounce of fresh hops and boil for about 8 to 10 minutes to prepare a strong hop tea. As I said earlier, I used dried hops and they seem to be working just fine, but fresh hops were preferred. The Victorians usually made their yeast at home as it was more flavorful and they believed it to be healthier than commercial yeast. Hops were added to check the acidic and lactic fermentations that generally accompany the alcoholic fermentation, such as in sourdough breads. This will keep the bread from having a sour flavor. In a keg or other suitable receptacle, mix 10 ounces of malt and 1/2 pounds of flour. I didn't have quite enough malt, but I don't think this has affected the recipe that much. Pour in just enough boiling hop tea to make a medium thick paste and mix well. Scalding the flour is important as it will break apart the starches in the flour and keep the yeast from going sour. Strain the remainder of the hop tea into a separate jar or keg and set aside until they have cooled to about 80 or 90 degrees. In order to make the whitest bread possible, the hops should be strained out. If they are left in, they will make the bread a little darker, and small pieces of the hops may be found in the bread. You should use clean hardwood, glass, or porcelain-lined receptacles for the yeast, as otherwise certain chemical actions might take place that would either darken the solution or spoil it altogether. For this, I decided to use my very large mason jar so that I could see into it easily, and just because it's about the only thing I had that would store all of this all at once. When the hops tea has cooled properly, pour it into the flour and malt mixture. wasn't sure if I was supposed to mix this, so I did, but it has since separated and I don't think I had to mix it up. Set in a warm, even temperature. In about 24 hours, spontaneous fermentation will have set up and foam will be seen to gather on the surface. A deep light scum will rise and a strong beer odor will be present. In about 48 hours, the scum will begin to settle and soon thereafter will disappear from the surface of the liquid. The yeast is ready for use as soon as it begins to settle.
Okay, so this is the 24-hour check-in, and it looks like it's working. I still don't know if I was supposed to stir it. It has separated, so I'm not sure if I was supposed to just leave a ball of paste at the bottom or what, but I mean, because that is definitely fermentation happening. So, there we go. It is day 2, and last night some things happened. I just woke up to this. Yesterday I didn't film, but all the scum had moved up to the top and it was quite deep, so I'm gonna see what's under here because I think it's working. It's everywhere.
Yeah, I know that would happen.
Oh my. So I'm assuming that this is the yeast, but I'm not 100% sure. The hard thing about doing stuff like this is that if you Google it, there's not really any clear answers. So I don't know what I'm supposed to do. So I again am unclear on whether I was supposed to stir this or not, but I stirred it and then everything immediately rose back up to the top. So I decided that instead of waiting until tonight to bake it tomorrow morning, I'm just going to make it today.
On page 130 of the Everyday Cookbook is the recipe for plain white family bread. Take 1 pint of flour and a half a pint of good hop yeast and stir it together about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. If you have no sugar in the yeast you use, stir a large teaspoonful in it before putting it in the flour. Here, as you can see, I was adding a little bit more of the yeast mixture to my flour because it didn't quite seem wet enough and I wanted it to all bind together. At 9, put 1/2 gallon of flour in a tray. Put the sponge in the middle of the flour with a piece of lard as large as a walnut. Because I didn't have lard, I used butter. Knead it all up with tepid water made salty with 2 teaspoonfuls or more to taste. Work it well and put it into a jar to rise. next morning, knead it over with a little flour. Make 2 loaves and set it in a warm place or oven until ready. Then put it to bake, and when done, wrap it in a nice coarse towel.
Okay, I'm coming at this knowing that I should have let this rise a lot longer, and it's very dense, but I'm gonna taste it anyway, just at least to get an idea of the flavor. It's bread. It definitely doesn't have a flavor that's that much different from any homemade bread I've ever made. It doesn't taste sour at all. I was a little bit worried because I need my coffee. Because when I dumped the dough out onto the counter, it was very sour smelling. And with at-home fermentation, yeast making, any of that, you always want to be really careful with your yeast or your fermented anything. Like with sourdough, you really want to watch out for off smells, and especially if there's orangey, yellowy, anything on it, that can be a problem. The like maiden yeast, I don't know what it's called. The starter did have some graying on the top, which at first I was a little worried about, and it smelled really sour. All of the sources said it would smell a little bit like lemon and garlic. It just smelled sour. I don't know how to explain what kind of sour. It didn't smell rotten. It was just a very, very intense sour, not a very nice smell. So I was a little concerned, and I will admit I rushed this loaf. I am letting the other one rise, the other loaf rise. I'm gonna give it my best shot, because I do know how to bake bread. I know, like, if you watch this other video, I know how to bake bread. I grew up with a grandma who made fresh bread all the time, and I learned from her, and I love to bake bread. But this, unfortunately, which I figured probably would happen, was kind of a fail, mainly because of time and because of unsurety, and because there are so many unknown quantities to making something Victorian, where if it's Victorian fermentation or yeast making, there are not a lot of resources on the internet for that kind of thing. I did message So Historically to see if she had any insight for me, but she has not gotten back to me, which is fine. She doesn't follow me on social media. I only found her through making this video. And of course, please check out her blog post about making Victorian yeast. That is where I discovered the Army Baker's Manual, and all of that. But I think for now that is going to be the end of this video. I'm sorry if this was a little disappointing or a weird ending. I wanted to do so much better, and if I had the time I could have. I will try to update either if I'm done editing this video and that bread is ready to bake, then I'll put in a clip here about how it turned out. But if it's still rising, and I suspect it's going to take another day to rise the way that it should because it's rising very slow, I will make a short for my channel. You can look out for that. I will update you on how that loaf turns out. I feel like I'm rambling, so I'm going to end the video here. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video, whether or not you try this method, whether or not you think I did everything wrong. Hopefully I will be coming out with a few more recipes from this era before I move on to the 1900s. So if cooking videos are your thing, if you want to learn more about historical cooking through somebody who knows nothing about historical cooking, please subscribe, follow along on this Betty Crocker and Beyond journey where I learn new methods for cooking, or I just cook some really weird recipes. As always, I hope that wherever you are feeling safe and loved. And until I see you again, have a beautiful day and thank you for watching. Bye! It's Victorian, baby! And welcome to another episode. Okay. And welcome to another episode. So it's another episode. Don't hit your head while you're talking. I have no other thoughts.